In 1999, in Bonavista Bay, a small community on the eastern coast of Newfoundland, two girls were on their way to work. Already late, one of the girls suggested they take a shortcut.
Me and my friend, we were heading to work one morning, and we were a bit late, so she thought it'd be a great idea if we went in through Bradley House way. There's a shortcut.
It was a route that would take them right past an old, empty house that many people in the town believed was haunted.
I have been told stories all my life that there are ghosts there, and I didn't want to go, but she managed to get me to go there. I was terrified, but she's not afraid, see? And she doesn't believe in any of the stories. I don't know how she convinced me to go in, but we walked through, and we get up to the house, and I just stopped. I just stopped dead in my tracks. And I'm looking in the window, and she's looking in the window. She's telling me, don't worry about it, it's okay, you know, don't worry about it. And then I went cold. And I looked over her shoulder, really, and there was this guy, and he had on really old-fashioned clothes, and I didn't notice a whole lot because as soon as I saw him and as soon as my friend noticed him, we just took off.
Bonavista Bay in eastern Newfoundland is home to one of the richest and oldest cultures in all of North America. For the first brave souls landed on these shores over 500 years ago, the area was to be a stopping-off point, a gateway to the mysteries of a new world. But it seems that some who arrived here have since decided to make it their permanent home, a place where they would live forever, well, at least in spirit.
There are sightings of ghosts in the Bonavista area at all times of day and night. Mostly, the ghosts just seem to be going about their business in the spirit world, but sharing the physical space with the living. No one knows who the ghosts are or where they came from. The history of the place goes back a long way, but the origin of the ghosts is a mystery.
I think that the whole area of the MacBeggar area is a haunted place. I think people in the area know that, and they appreciate that.
Many of the paranormal incidents in the area center around Bradley House, a stately home, once part of the MacBeggar plantation, a fish hatchery.
The ghosts that live here, they were here before us, and we're only visitors to their home, just as the visitors come every day to visit the house and we give them a guided tour of the house. We are also just visitors to the families that would have lived here before. A lot of the people in the area here would be scared to walk past this house because of what they might see or what they may possibly hear. There is a story of the old lady that is seen in the bedroom window upstairs. You see a light up in the windows there, and there is no electricity in the house, so there is no reason for there to be a light there. So people did see that as they were walking past.
The mysterious woman at the window has also been seen outside the house. People have reported seeing an elderly woman coming in the gate. Others have seen the gates opening and closing when no one was there.
It's a very old home, and there's a lot of different families that have lived here over the years. And in those days, there were no funeral homes and places to go, so people would have died in the house. And oftentimes, when people die in the house, they don't really want to leave home. And I think that's a lot of the reason why there is so much unrest here in the house.
Bradley House is only one of the haunted areas of MacBeggar. The nearby point is the site of another eerie mystery.
Out on Moses Point, there was a story of a young boy that I'm not sure he was playing there or was up on the cliffside there. It's quite high, and I'm told fell over and drowned there. So when a storm is brewing and the wind is coming from the north, you always hear people tell you that they'd see a light off the point, shining off the point area there, and they see the image of a young boy in the shadow. And if you stare at it, it comes toward you. And if you continue to stare at it, it will come right toward you and pull you off the cliff as well. And so they tell you you shouldn't continue looking at it, you should turn away, because if you continue to look at it, something may happen to you as well. So that's one of the stories there on Moses Point.
Perhaps the most intriguing mystery of MacBeggar concerns the discovery of numerous coffins emerging from the ground they were buried in hundreds of years ago.
Many years ago, a channel was dug from O'Day's Pond here to drain the water off from the pond and into the ocean here. And when they did that, they found several coffins and caskets there buried in the soil there. And when they dug up the caskets, they found that the bodies that were in the room very well preserved because of the boggy area that we're in here. And they were dressed in a Puritan-style clothing, which was very unusual for us in the area. It's not familiar to our area at all. And so they dug these coffins up and they reburied them out on Moses Point, this same area that this young boy had drowned. And as the sea is on our coastline here, it gets quite treacherous. And apparently the sea had come in over the years and had washed the bodies away. And so it's said that there's a lot of spirits in unrest here because of these bodies that were dug up through the trench area and were never found and never reburied. We're not really sure where these bodies came from or what their origins are really. And because of all the coffins that are buried in the MacBager area, it's thought to be haunted because of that reason. At first it may have been rumored that it may have been some French people because there was a lot of fighting between the French and the English along the coast of Newfoundland over the years, and it was thought that it may have possibly been a French burial ground at one point. But the clothing that they were wearing was more Puritan in style, and so we're not really sure where these bodies came from or what their origins are really.
The identity of these bodies and the mystery surrounding the coffins so intrigued renowned psychic Shelley Stokes that she braved gale force winds to communicate with their spirits. She made contact with a ghost named Thomas.
The man Thomas that I was picking up on and talking with, he was telling me about the point that I had to go to the point that a lot of his people were buried in graves on the point. But I do believe that they were attacked and probably killed by a group of English. Now, it's something we'd have to check into the history to find out the details on it. This man, Thomas, was talking about Quaker people and that he was a Quaker. He explained to me that the Puritans killed their people. They were classed as heretics by the Puritans. Somewhere in this vicinity was a house that they used as a meeting house. They didn't have churches, they had meeting houses, and they would get together 2 and 3 times a week for church meetings. I just think he wants people to know his story, to know that they existed. And it's as if he had a mission to accomplish, and he still feels that he has to do that. I don't think he's ready to move on. It seems like that he was attached to this place. I don't feel that he's ready to move on.
We may never know if the bodies in the coffins are indeed Quakers murdered hundreds of years ago. But Bonavista Bay is a place where the living and the dead share a home. Back when coal fueled the engines of industry, the town of Nordegg, Alberta, was prosperous. But the switch to petroleum eventually turned Nordegg into a ghost town. What started the decline was an event described at the time as the worst mining accident in Canadian history.
Coal mining at one point was vital to everything that happened in Canada. In the earlier years of the 20th century, quite a number of mines were developed, and Nordegg was one of those. I was born in Nordegg, and I took all my school years here, grew up here, the old school and the new school, which is now the museum here. After the town closed in '55, I had completed my first year of teaching, and so went on to other things. Once I retired, I was asked if I would consider coming back to Nordegg. One of my grandsons came out to stay with us over the course of the summer while his mother was retraining to go back into the workforce. So the first night that Ryan was here, he had come in to see if I was going to read him a story or what we were going to do, but he was almost falling asleep. Time for you to go to bed. Yes. Go get washed. So with just minimal protesting, he did head off to get himself cleaned up and ready for bed. And he was nervous, scared. I didn't understand why, but he said to me, Grandma, there's something in there. What's that man in there? But he insisted that this was so, and so I said we would go and explore. And of course, when I got there, I didn't see anything. But I really don't think he would have made it up. He was scared. And so I've thought of it since and wondered, what did he see?
Towns are like people. They're born of great expectations. But for some, tragedy strikes, and they wither and die. All that remains of a once thriving community are a few moldering graves in some roadside cemetery. That could have happened to Nordegg, Alberta, but for the persistence of a few locals and the ghosts of the miners who still linger here.
On October 31st of 1941, all the conditions for an explosion came together. What happened, according to the study that was done later, was that there was a windy shot. This means that the coal, which was supposed to blow into the seam, actually blew back out. The coal dust then mixed with the methane, and you also have a flame, and those are the three requirements for an explosion. The bodies of the dead miners were recovered. They were brought out in coal cars to the surface. Everybody was family. This was a catastrophe, and a catastrophe beyond belief. So it was a day that is still remembered sadly by the people of Nordegg.
I knew most of the men, not all of them, but most of them. And I seen all the men as they brought them out of the mine. And there were some awful looking sights that I'll never forget. One man had a horse's hind leg right through his stomach. So things like that you'll never forget.
And then they were buried in a cemetery outside of town. At that time, it was outside of town, in a little grove of trees, a very peaceful place. As the town expanded, which it did later, that graveyard for the miners, the 29 miners killed that day, became part of the town itself and was built right next to the school. And so I was reading through one of the books on Martin Nordegg's earlier years, and Chuck said goodnight. Good night. I continued with my work, and then I noticed footsteps in the hall. Well, it wasn't very long when I heard the same thing again, these footsteps going down the hall, quite pronounced. And so this time I thought, well, that is strange. Now there's twice. I wonder if he's not feeling well. So I got up and looked out in the hall, but he wasn't there. Chuck? And there was no sound of him in the bathroom anywhere. So I went into his bedroom and said to him, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" He said, "Yes, why?" And I said, "Well, I've heard you up to the bathroom twice, and you haven't even been in bed for quite an hour," which just totally left me speechless. But I did go back out and have another look around, and of course I did not see anything. I never have seen anything, but I continue to hear things. There's something special about Nordegg, and of course coming from Nordegg there is a certain amount of prejudice there, and anybody from Nordegg will tell you that. This is home. But you find too that people who come to visit find that strong attraction too, and they enjoy being here, they're fascinated by it, and they come back. So is there any wonder that the people who lived here and died here don't want to leave it either?
Kingston, Ontario is one of Canada's oldest and most beautiful cities. It was once the nation's capital and still has an elegance that befits a capital city. It boasts gracious century homes and tree-lined streets. But behind the gentle facade, the city also has its secrets. This sunny park hides a tragic history.
Well, we'd been in the house for about 3 years. My baby was 3 months old, and I was downstairs in the living room. My husband was out for the night. I decided I finally had a moment to sit back and relax, so I picked up a book and started to read, and then I heard the baby moving on the baby monitor. And then all of a sudden, I heard a voice. It was a woman's voice with a thick Irish accent. And I got alarmed. I was shocked. So I ran upstairs to the baby's room, but as I got to the door, it slammed in my face. So I grabbed the handle, and it opened a little bit, and I started pushing on it, but there was something pushing against it, and I couldn't get in. All of a sudden, the door just swung open. It finally let go, and I ran into the room to make sure that my daughter was okay, and I looked around, and there was nobody in there. So I checked to make sure that my daughter was okay. She was sound asleep and peaceful. So I looked around the room a little bit, and then I noticed that the window was open. So I thought, well, maybe it was the wind from the window that had slammed the door shut. So I went over to close it, but I realized that it wasn't really a breezy night. So I shut the window, and as I'm standing up, I see this reflection in the mirror, and it's this woman. She was wearing something out of the 1800s, and she had the shawl draped over her head, and she was almost disheveled. She was very sad, and she almost looked ill. As I turned around, there was no one standing there. I looked around the room a little bit more, and I was a little creeped out, so I went, and the first thing on my mind was get my daughter and get her out of there, and got out of the room. Later on, I found out what the story of this area was. It's nicknamed Skeleton Park, and many bodies were buried there, so the fact that, the way she was dressed, and it makes sense. I almost feel as if she heard my baby crying and was there to comfort her in a way.
On the surface, Kingston's McBurney Park seems like any other neighborhood park. But below the surface, this park holds a macabre secret. It was once a cemetery, home to 10,000 poor souls, most of whom were Irish immigrants who fled the potato famine only to die in a faraway land. It is believed that the ghosts that haunt this park today are the ghosts of these people whose graves were disturbed.
I'm Jeff. We're here at Skeleton Park in Kingston. Basically what we're doing here is I was here in July, and I was intrigued by the history of this location being a playground, as you can see in the background, and it used to be a cemetery, which walking around you could see the stones in the ground still actually coming to the surface. And basically what we're doing here tonight is we're going to do an investigation. What we're going to do, first of all, we're going to do a walk around to find hot spots of this location. Basically what I got here is I got a night vision camera, infrared, which I have it on right now. This here is a booster, which allows me to shoot from 10 feet to 100 feet. And I have a 35mm camera, which I can shoot simultaneously with my digital camera. So if anything comes up on the video, I can also get it on the other two pieces of equipment as well.
Elizabeth is waiting to talk to us.
Okay.
She found me way over there, called me over to there, and said that she would talk to us when we got to the bench. She's looking for her daughter. Long blonde hair. She's wearing a light bluish dress. She's obviously not got a lot of money. And her daughter would be about 4 years old. She passed and left her daughter behind. She knows she's passed on, but she's still looking to rejoin with her daughter on the other side, and thinks for some reason, I think Elizabeth was buried here. She showed me around the other side where she was. She thinks if she stays around here, she'll find her daughter.
Helen Peters was jogging along Burlington Bay early one morning. As she stopped to cool down, she noticed a patch of fog over the water. It seemed to be moving into shore. As the eerie white mist drifted closer, she could make out an old ship emerging from the fog. Suddenly, there was a blood-curdling scream, Fearing someone was in trouble, she ran towards the sound. The screaming escalated, seeming to come from all directions. Then, just as suddenly, the mist cleared, and there was no ship in sight. The screaming abruptly stopped, and she was alone on the empty shore.
Once a lively port, Burlington Bay Harbor is now a virtual no man's land. However, passers-by have said they've heard the agonizing scream of a man echoing across the waters. And on stormy nights, a ship can be seen floating in the fog. This apparition is believed to be the cargo ship where Jem Horner met his doom in 1827.
Jem Horner and two mates were unloading a shipload of quarry rocks onto the pier. Jem slipped and lost his footing, wedging his leg into a small crevice between the dock and the boat. Before he could get his injured leg out, the boat rolled into the dock and crushed his leg. His screams of agony could be heard for miles. His leg was horribly mangled, and he was crying in pain. Jem's shipmates were a callous pair, with no fondness for Jem Horner. Hoping to claim his share of the wages, they pulled him away from the boat and left him to die at the back door of a nearby tavern. The tavern owner heard Jem's screams, dragged the injured man inside, and called a doctor. When the doctor arrived, Jem was in extreme pain. He had lost a lot of blood and was losing life. The leg was so mangled, it couldn't be saved. The doctor made a grim decision to amputate immediately. The operation would have to be performed right there in the back room of the tavern. It was a brutal procedure, with no anesthesia and the most basic of tools. But despite the doctor's best efforts, Jem had already lost too much blood and did not survive the operation. The doctor gave the tavern owner Jem's amputated leg with instructions to bury it, but the tavern owner didn't think it was right to bury the man without his leg, so he put it in a keg of whiskey to preserve it until the funeral. In a gruesome turn of events, the very same shipmates who had left Jem to die outside the tavern came upon the keg and stole it. They stayed up all night drinking whiskey. It wasn't until 2 days later, when an inquest was called, that they discovered Jem's severed leg had been in the keg they were drinking from. Patrick Cross and his team from Burlington Ghost and Haunting Researchers have been documenting the Jem Horner ghost for a number of years.
Okay, we're here at the inlet, the actual location, the original Burlington Bay, and this is where we believe Jem Horner's ghost really is, including many people hearing his deathly screams that still resonate in the air today. Right on the shoreline here where all the rocks are, this is the best spot with a perfect view where the actual boat came in and where you can actually get the best sighting and possibly sounds and the ghost sounds of Jem Horner himself that appear right in this area. In order to find ghost activity, usually this is a standard compass and it would pick up electromagnetic field energy. There it goes. It was in one of the areas that's more active. There it goes. Yeah, there it goes. This is a digital thermometer, meaning that you can actually, the temperature go up and down within plus and minus 1 degree. If the temperature drops in a matter of seconds, you would actually see that. Although we're outdoors, there is a bit of a cold spot here, meaning it's colder than it is on this side here. So I do feel a lot of cold air around Michelle, especially. As you notice, the compass is going crazy right now. The temperature is dropping drastically. So this would be a typical good example. Now, why is there EMF or energy here? Because this is all rock and wood, so it shouldn't be anything electrical whatsoever. So ghosts are made up of electrons, positive and negative electrons, and there is a lot of activity here. And now it's probably still dropping. It's still dropping over here. So it was constant here, it's still dropping. Look at that, look at that. It's really going now. A lot of activity over here. That's bizarre.
Wow.
And of course, temperature is still dropping. I'm feeling a lot of cold air right here. Most of the times you won't get this because the compass will stay due north. The only way this can happen is if there is a lot of ghost activity around us. And it's now dropped to 60.4. When I go back over here, it goes back up again. It starts going back. So there is a lot of the cold air, cold presence right in this spot here, which is the area probably where Jim was working or had died.
Did you hear that?
I heard that.
That was a little thump.
Well, that shouldn't be there, because there's nothing there.
I know.
Why that sounded like a boat, a thumping of a boat.
Exactly, yeah.
We just heard that.
Bang.
Yeah, it was like a boat banging against the shore.
Yeah.
And that's typical what you'd hear, boats crashing or the screams.
Yeah.
Okay, as we were emerging out from the other side, there was a bit of ghost energy in there. And when we investigated this previous, by the actual shores and the rocks, we found other ghost energy as well as we got ghost ectoplasm and mist.
Oh, that might go there.
Really?
Right here. Okay, try there it is. Putting it right in here.
Let's try it.
Yeah, it's really freezing right here. Right here, Jim. You're right. It's freezing.
But it's
It is. It's really cold as opposed to over there. It's nice and warm. It's freezing right here. Yeah.
Could be moving around as well.
You were like you said, you're getting an orb. Look here, Michelle. Feel this. Holy cow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Oh man, it's a really large amount.
Strange as that.
It's gone. It's gone again. There it is. It's like warm. See?
It's moving. Look.
Yeah. That's just unreal.
I think Jem is very curious as to what we're all doing out here tonight, because we're feeling him very strong and getting a lot of pockets of energy. There he goes.
It's like we're being observed by what we're observing. It's like the hunter is now being the hunted. It's the ghosts are now watching us. We're trying to look for ghosts, but yet they're watching us.
It's little pockets, but it's concentrated energy. It's just freezing right here. Over here, it's gone, and it's right around mostly Michelle and Jim right now. When we first came down here, we were getting very little active energy, and now we've attracted, and they're excited. Now they're all over the place over here because we're open to it. We're calling on it, and it seems to be here.
I really got the impression that we were being watched the entire time. I know we talked about that a little bit tonight, but I really felt as though we were not the ones really doing the investigating, that we had ghosts, basically investigating us. They were very curious as to what we were doing, and of course I was really fascinated by the large bang that we heard tonight, because when we rushed out to the lake, there was literally nothing there, and that was pretty impressive.
Nearly 170 years later, there have been numerous sightings of a ghost ship in the harbor and reports of Jem Horner's screams heard across the bay. They hope to find new evidence for their file on Jem Horner's ghost. If you happen to come down to Burlington Bay, take a moment to listen for Jem Horner's screams. You may even see a phantom ship or see Jem Horner's ghost hobbling along the rocky shore. Deep in the Dungarvan woods in northern New Brunswick, there's a ghost whose whooping cries are said to make a man's blood run cold. People say it's the angry spirit of a young man named Ryan Garvon, which has haunted the woods since the young man's grisly death in 1827.
The Dungarvan Whooper has probably been the best-known ghost in this area of the Miramichi in New Brunswick for more than a century. His otherworldly screams can be heard echoing through the forests. Some say it's the dying screams of Ryan Garvon, seeking revenge for what happened to him was horrible then, as it is today.
In the early 1800s, there was an insatiable demand for lumber to supply the maritime shipyards. Lumber camps sprang up all along the Dungarvan River. The loggers were men of all backgrounds, from farmers to ex-convicts. The men worked under dangerous conditions and spent their evenings cooped up in cramped cabins, often drinking and gambling away their wages. In 1827, young Ryan Garvon was hired on as a cook at one of these camps. A quiet man who kept to himself, Ryan didn't drink or gamble. He saved his wages to pay his mother's medical bills. Not long after Ryan joined the crew, a severe storm washed out the road, the only road in and out of the remote camp. Food supplies were very low, and nothing could get in. The lumberjacks, hungry after a day in the woods, grew irritable and aggressive and began to turn on the camp boss. One man even threatened that if he didn't get meat that very evening, he would kill and cook the camp boss. Fearing this was not an idle threat, the camp boss conceived of a ghastly plan. Alone with Ryan at the camp, he called to the reclusive young cook to meet him at the back of the cabin. Little did Ryan know that he was walking to his doom. That evening, when the lumberjacks returned to camp, it was the camp boss and not Ryan who met them. The aroma of meat stew wafted through the air. The camp boss told the crew that some supplies had been brought in by a messenger who had come to call Ryan home to tend his dying mother. What the crew didn't know was that the camp boss had butchered Ryan and cooked his flesh into the stew that they were devouring with such pleasure. Later that night, the men were awakened by a horrible whooping sound coming from outside their cabin. That was the first time the unearthly whoops were heard. It was a sound that would torment the crew boss for years. As the stories about the Hooper spread, loggers refused to go anywhere near the area. One day, many years later, when this was one of the few remaining areas left to be logged, a lumberjack came across some bones an animal had dug up. They were human bones. And since the only person to have gone missing in the area was the young cook Ryan Garvon, it was concluded they were his remains. Everyone thought that if the remains were given a proper burial, the awful whooping might stop. The logging company, wanting to end the superstition, brought in a priest to perform the rites. But the whooping did not stop. Indeed, it may have gotten worse.
Grant them eternal rest, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace. Amen.
Well, my grandfather was a logger for many years, and he used to tell us some pretty crazy stories, but the craziest would probably have to be about the Dungarvan Whooper. Well, the story starts off way back in the day with my grandfather playing some cards and having a few drinks with some fellow loggers of his, and he's losing badly to a rowdy drunk from Alberta, when all of a sudden they heard a loud whoop come from outside. So when they hear this noise getting louder and louder, trying to figure out what the whooping is, everyone's scared, except for this loud, obnoxious guy.
What's this?
It's the Hooper.
The what?
The Dungarvan Whooper. You never heard of the Dungarvan Whooper? You've heard of the Hooper.
No, I never heard of the Hooper.
It's the young camp cook Ryan. He was killed back in the 1800s by his crew boss. He still haunts the woods in this camp all around this area.
And that's what that noise is supposed to be?
Yes, that's him right now.
Right, that was him now?
Yes, that was him.
And you guys believe that foolishness, do you? Oh, gosh.
The noise is so loud, it seems like it's right outside the door. So this loud, obnoxious guy, he figured, well, hey, you guys are all afraid of it. I'm gonna go right outside and figure out what it is. So he just grabbed his whiskey bottle and heads out the door. He's still calling them all chickens, and he's even making fun of the whooping noise. He's just yelling back, just whooping at it.
Come. Yeah.
Come on out, guys. Come on. We gotta find the whooper. Come on, you bunch of chickens. Come on. Whoop, whoop. Come on, guys. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
And he's just venturing off darker and darker, and he's still whooping. And then all of a sudden the whooping stops. And he hasn't been seen since. So as the noise ends, everyone inside the cabin's trying to figure out, well, where's this loud, obnoxious guy? He just disappears like that. So they wanted to venture outside, but they didn't want to go too far. They didn't want to venture off into the woods because they don't even know where this whooping sound's coming from. So they waited till the next morning to figure out where their friend went to. And they ventured off outside into the daylight, and they found nothing. They found nothing at all. Except for his whiskey bottle. And still to this day, my grandfather swears that that night, that was the Dungarvan Whooper, that was whooping. He swears that that's what it was that everyone was afraid of. And that's how his friend disappeared. And still to this day, he will never go back there day or night.
What is it that the Dungarvan Whooper wants from those who hear his cries? Revenge? Justice? Or is his whooping a reminder to those who venture into the backwoods of New Brunswick of how far some might go for the taste of flesh, even human flesh?
In 1859, a Canadian entrepreneur opened Watson's Mill, which became the lifeblood of the community. It was the fruition of a dream, but a tragedy ended it all one horrible day and began one of the strangest ghost stories in Canadian history.
My name is Glenn Shackleton. I'm the director of the Haunted Walk of Ottawa. The spot that we're in today is the Manotick Grist Mill, also known as Watson's Mill. And this is one of our more famous haunted spots in the Ottawa area.
Joseph Currier built the mill in 1859 and 1860. They officially opened the mill on Valentine's Day, 1860. And the Ottawa Citizen newspaper reported that it was one of the finest mills that they had ever seen in Eastern Canada.
The year after the mill was built, Joseph Currier got married to a very young wife. She was half of his age, only 20 years old, a woman by the name of Anna Crosby Currier. 2 weeks after they were married, Joseph Currier brought his wife here to visit the place of his business. And as they were conducting business downstairs, they told Anna to be free to wander through the building and have a look at it for herself.
March the 11th, 1861 was when the tragedy struck. They came and settled in Ottawa in early March, went on to Manotick to have the first official celebration of their one-year anniversary of a very successful mill. Mrs. Currier, who was 20, and Mr. Currier was 40, were being shown through the mill, and on the second floor, her long hoop skirt got caught in one of the revolving pieces of machinery. She was flung against a very sturdy post, killed instantly, and that was the beginning of the end of Mr. Currier. His wife was so much a part of him that when she was killed in the mill, he just couldn't take it anymore, and he got out of the mill and apparently never came near the town again.
Instead, he went into the carpentry business in Ottawa, where he began to build houses to get over his grief. One of the buildings which he built and spent most of his time on was 24 Sussex Drive, now the home of the Prime Minister of Canada.
This is a highly charged story about emotion, raw emotion called love. The love between two people, a man and a woman. Unfortunately, this love would and wouldn't extend beyond the grave. She's still there. He may not be.
The first reported sighting of the ghost occurred when a fisherman fishing off the dam got caught in a very heavy wind and rainstorm, and he sought refuge out of that by crawling in an open basement window in the mill.
Was sleeping on the first floor. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by the sounds of loud moaning and weeping. He was absolutely terrified. He spent the entire night huddled in fear on the first floor. In the morning, he found out that there was no one in the building all night long. He could have only heard the ghost of Anne Currier. Many of the people in the village of Manotick also say that they will see signs of Anne Currier. They see her moving from window to window, looking down upon them. As well, some local children who have been by the museum at night say that they will see a woman dressed in period clothing who stares down from the window on the second floor down towards them, looking very sad. Sounds occasionally are heard coming from the third floor as well, not only by the staff who work here in the museum, but also by people who happen to be walking by the museum at night. They say they will hear sometimes the sound of crying or sobbing. At other times, they will hear a mournful wailing or other sounds of that nature. There has never been any explanation for these sounds, as the museum is closed at night, and on many of these occasions, it was certain that there was no one here.
Everyone that comes in knows the story of the dead bride and of the mill. And there's a lot of moving equipment that makes noises. There's a lot of sounds that come from the moving water. And a building like that would be creaking all the time. So obviously, it has a bit of an eerie feeling. But sometimes when a dramatic death occurs and there's a lot of grief, that it's almost as if a building picks up all these vibrations, the same as a record picks up the vibrations of the singers. In a way, it's almost as if someone who is a receiver and highly open to the psychic comes into a place where a traumatic event occurred. They become almost like the needle and have the thing go around again and happen. It's not necessarily that there's a ghost living in the place. It's just that perhaps the event was seeped and recorded into the walls.
Some psychics claim that there are male presences as well here in the mill, and that Anne Currier is not the only ghost at Watson's Mill. They say that there are several male presences right here on the 3rd floor. They say that these are hostile, malevolent spirits. Many people will hear banging or footsteps, and staff here at the museum also find that heavy equipment has been moved around in the attic when they're absolutely certain the building has been empty. Perhaps these male spirits are the souls of lost workers here at the mill who are trapped still here in the attic. Work in those days, of course, in a mill of this sort would have been very dangerous. It's extremely likely that many would have lost their lives in the process of working here in the mill.
The staff has experienced numerous sightings or sounds or even temperature changes in the mill. One employee in particular would hear voices, and this led her one day to go down into the basement. She heard chains rattling. The temperature dropped, and she fled, rarely to go down there again.
Watson's Mill is still run as a museum, so it is a place that anyone can visit. It has a terrific ghost story and quite an interesting history, and is well worth a stop.
Watson's Mill remains the same as it did the day Anne died. Love has kept Anne chained to the place she died. Anna still awaits the day of freedom to join her husband. And perhaps one day she may. The Morton Building, once a popular brewery, now houses 2 theatrical companies and an archaeological research center. But a specter from the past may still walk through the halls, a vigilant officer following his eternal rounds, possibly in search of his killer.
These buildings were originally built in Kingston in 1844 to house the Morton Brewery. By 1867, the man who owned the brewing companies, James Morton, was quite well known amongst people living here as being a very wealthy man. People started to believe that he kept thousands upon thousands of dollars hidden in a safe inside the brewery building. Well, one night in 1867, these men decided to break into the brewery and steal the money from James Morton's safe, led by a young man named Ethan Allen, who had been in trouble with the law in Kingston before. So they crept up to this place at night. They hid under the cover of darkness. They waited for the night watchman to pass by on his rounds. Once the night watchman passed by, the men snuck into the building and they began to work away at the safe. Now, one of the men was kept outside to keep watch. However, he became quite terrified when he saw the night watchman returning. this point, Ethan Allen became absolutely enraged. He grabbed himself an iron bar. He was going to take care of this night watchman himself. The men did manage to escape Kingston. However, a few days later, they were captured in the United States and they were brought back here. They stood trial, and Ethan Allen was sentenced to hang for murder, and hang he did at the county jail behind the old courthouse here.
Our watchman in the brewery is actually a ghost. He's a man, a poor soul that was murdered while on duty years ago. His spirit remains behind. His untimely death keeps him prisoner of that building.
My name is Anna Robertson, and I'm a producer here at Theatre 5. Well, a number of incidents have occurred here. On one occasion, I was directing an actor. While I was discussing the scene, the back curtains moved by themselves.
So, how was it?
And I just stopped. It threw me off. I didn't know why all the curtains were moving back there.
The Morton Brewery was once the site of a hospital. In fact, actors on a given night in the theater witness a group of ghosts sitting in the audience, watching them. 1 minute they're there, the next minute they're gone.
My name is Justin Robertson, and I've been working at this theater since I was born. And I've seen some pretty weird stuff. I've heard some stuff, and I've had stuff happen to me. During Streetcar Named Desire, I looked over in front of the lighting booth, and that's when I saw these three white, figures sitting in the seats. So I just started to freak out, and I started throwing stuff at them. I was just shocked. A lot of the stuff that I've heard and seen, I've freaked out. I've screamed, yelled, ran away, had tears out of my eyes, just scares the crap out of me.
Perfectly normal people can see things that aren't there routinely. You can set up circumstances where people think they saw a person, and it's partly suggestion and partly ambiguous stimuli. So we know that our brains will do that. So the question is, if someone's in an old building with an expectation there might be a ghost, was that what happened? It's certainly explainable that way in terms of what we know about psychology. Of course, you can't say 100% because you weren't there. But the wise person would say, given we know the brain will do that, the brain will play tricks like that quite routinely, then you want more evidence than someone simply saying, well, I saw it, therefore it has to be so.
Nobody wants to spend the night alone here. Any technician that we have working here late feels really uncomfortable, like she is being watched while working. We had a technician here who helped out. Her name was Ashley. She has seen the woman in our large wardrobe.
I was walking down to the big wardrobe during Midsummer Night's Dream to go look for my costume. And I had to go look in the medieval section. I heard a lot of stuff happen there, so I was just a little bit skeptic, and I just kind of walked up, and I was like, oh, nothing's gonna happen. So I started walking in, and I just looked up, and there was this little white figure just floating there in circles over and over. It was just like an outline of shadow. So I just looked for a costume and then left.
The costumes in this theater are actually genuine clothing of the era stretching back to possibly 100 years ago. So we know that is why a spirit may be attached to a particular shirt or suit, depending on whether it was theirs. So we know that spirits often become attached, have this attachment with an object. It is not unusual, and it happens quite frequently in any museum in this country.
My name is Sue Baisley, and I'm an archaeologist at the Kingston Archaeological Center. The building that we work in is called the Morton Brewery, and I've been working here for a number of years in this particular building, and Samantha, my dog, has been working with me, and she's around all the time. While we've been working here over a number of years, Sam and I have had some interesting experiences with what could be considered some other kind of presence in the building when we were here. What Samantha would do is actually go out to the middle of the room and start barking at what would appear to be nothing. And when I would go out to see what she was barking at, there would be absolutely nothing there, but it wasn't as if she was just barking at a noise. It would be like if there was somebody in the room, it would be like she was actually barking at that person. But I could see nothing. But obviously she could sense something was there, and this has actually happened on more than one occasion. And it usually happens too when nobody else is in the building, it's just the two of us.
Now, sometimes animals will supposedly react to the presence of something. Well, that has to do with our interpretation. If you're in your house and your dog starts to bark, and it's a brand new house and it's not haunted as far as you know and so forth, what we say, oh, it must be a cat outside or something, you dismiss it. If you're in an old building, your dog starts to bark or look at a particular part of the room, it's much more easy to see there must be a presence there. It may be mice in the walls scurrying in a way that we humans can't hear, but a dog can hear. It may even make a dog bark. So if we were being reasonable and rational about it, if we really wanted to know, we'd say, okay, let's start getting some hard data here. Let's put in some tape recorders. Let's see if we can find areas where the dog is more likely to bark and so forth. But people don't do that.
Domino Theatre has been in this complex for since 1975. I've been involved with the theatre for about 20 years. Now, there is a ghost in this theatre, and I think some people scoff at that idea, but I have heard it and I have seen it. We had a young man running sound in the sound booth. Is up a flight of stairs off for this room. He came down at intermission, a little bit shaken, and said to me, this voice spoke to me. It was garbled, and when I turned around, there was nobody there, but I felt a presence. There was on the door. And when I went to open it, the door pulled against me, and I couldn't open it. Stood back and tried it again. This time the door opened and there was nobody there. So you judge for yourself. I saw an apparition. The stage was empty. By that I mean there was no set on it. And I was sitting in the front row, and a friend of mine was sitting about 4 seats from me. We were chatting. This apparition started. And the apparition was strange in that it was bulky, it didn't have a head, it didn't have any feet, and it didn't have any hands. And I guess I did a real double take, and my friend, who was actually looking the opposite way, looked at me and said, my God, Ken, what's happened? And so I told him, perhaps you have to be open to these or willing to accept that maybe these things do exist. I really think that in this world that we live in, there are a lot of things that we can't or don't tune into, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're not there.
We have here a good recipe of hauntings. We have spirits from the hospital, our poor watchman, and again, here we have an archaeological office. Who knows what objects they have there where a spirit is still attached and has remained with that object. It's no wonder that some people walking in this brewery feel uneasy.